Hey there, guys. Vedant Naik here, and
Hey
hey,
Vedant,
hey, what's up, man?
how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good, good. I see Keenan has already joined. That's nice.
Yeah, a few more people are joining slowly but surely. So,
Awesome, man.
where are you in? You said you're in Mumbai, right? You've been back
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
while.
yeah. I'm,
So,
I'm in Bombay.
so Keenan said you're moving to Alibag. What's up with that? Are you? Are
I
you?
was there. I was there for a while, and then I sort of came back when it started raining.
Sweet. Okay. So, are you planning to go back at some point, or?
I hope so. I hope so. But I think it's not the best place to be during the rain. But I hope to be back maybe in September.
Oh, nice, nice. So we've got about 15 people in here. Would you like to wait for a few more people to join, or should we start?
Let's go for it, man. Go for
All
it.
right, let's go
I
for
think
it.
there is some echo on your end.
It is possible. I'm sitting in a soundproof studio, so there is some slight echo.
Okay, let's roll with it.
Sure, let's do it. So, so Arjun, so just to introduce you really quickly to all the people who are joining, you are of course the CEO of Dr. Vedya's.
I
You
was.
are
I was.
you
I was.
was so sorry, and you are also you are behind the Direct to a Billion Consumers podcast, and you were featured in the Forbes 30 under 30 list, which is a very big achievement. And I was actually watching your TED talk earlier today, just get a little insight into you as a person, and it was just one of the most fascinating things ever. So I guess the first thing that I want to ask is, as someone who spent quite a bit of his life overseas, and as someone who, you know, for someone who Ayurveda or Indian medicine, as a lot of people put it, was limited to things that my grandmother would suggest to me. Can you give me a little bit of, I guess, a more modern insight into what exactly Ayurvedic medicine is?
Sure. Yeah. So look, I think I'll also talk to you about why I did what I ended up doing. Right? So my
Yeah.
family's been Ayurveda for the last 150 years now. My grandfather, great grandfather, and third generation before were all Ayurvedic doctors. And this was sort of this is my family legacy, right? The formulations passed down from generation to generation. I grew up with Ayurveda myself. I was cured of asthma using my grandfather's treatment, and so it meant more to me than just family legacy. And it meant more to me than just being sort of part of my last name, right, Vaidya. Uh,
Right.
and really, what I saw was Ayurvedic products were perceived as boring, old school, and poorly packaged. There was a gap between Ayurvedic products and modern consumers, and that's what we set out to solve.
Got it. And so, because I've actually known quite a few people who have had asthma. So, what exactly is the cure for the Ayurvedic cure for asthma? Like, what did he prescribe to you?
It was one of our products actually. A product called Bronco Herb. Yeah,
I'm sorry, what was it?
it was one of our products. It was a product called Bronco Herb.
I see. So, uh, and then you said, your family has done this for 6 generations. So that's,
Yeah,
I was trying to do the math in my head, and that goes back
150 years.
150
150.
years.
Yeah.
So, uh, how did Ayurveda and your family's practice of it? How exactly did it survive? Quite possibly the greatest blight on this country, which was colonialism. How exactly did it survive that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So look, Ayurveda had a sort of renaissance very recently, right? And I would say
Right.
that 2014, 2019 was the renaissance of Ayurveda. But until then, really, there was no business with Dr. Vaidya's. My grandfather ran a clinic, which he inherited from his father. And sort of he did what was customary at the time, just take on the clinic. There were a lot of patients that came to the clinic, 350 patients a day, more than 12,000 patients a month would write to him via post. But Ayurveda was not, it was perceived as sort of second fiddle or poor cousin to allopathy. And I mean, colonialism had a deep impact on us as a country as well. And so for a very long time, what was Indian was perceived as sort of substance was imported or came from the West in general with products, with medicine, all of that was perceived as sort of the better alternative or the better quality thing to do. And I think this stayed, to be honest, for a very long time. And then I saw a fundamental change when I moved back to India in 2014, right? I saw Ministry of Ayush created, government changed, hundreds of thousands of consumers coming to Ayurveda, Patanjali revolution happening, um, Unilever relaunching their Ayush range. And with all of this, actually, Ayurveda was coming back to the fore. And so I think that, look, the interesting thing about Ayurveda, to be honest, is that it it has stood the test of time, right? Whether it's colonialism or everything else, it's been around for like 5,000 years. And so colonialism wasn't sort of something uh, that could have stopped Ayurveda, but I think definitely had an impact. And I think 2014 is for me the renaissance of Ayurveda, and 2020 with COVID is the inflection point. Karishma is asking what's the backdrop. I'm actually in WeWork today, testing out using this space, and maybe we'll work from here. So yeah, that's the backdrop.
Nice. And it's actually it's interesting that you use that phrase, the renaissance of Ayurveda, because like yourself, I too also lived overseas, and I went to college in the US like you did. And it was such a odd culture shock for me to see how traditionally Indian things like yoga and you know uh, I guess chai to an extent, our tea and our food and our and seeing I guess American people going around saying namaste to each other was something that was a little interesting to see. And so where do you feel the kind of progress is in terms of Ayurveda being embraced in other countries outside India?
Yeah, I think look, there is progress for sure, right? And I think there is. Uh, I actually viewed the whole yoga experience as a positive one. I was like, look, if yoga pants, yoga gyms, yoga apparel, and Lululemon can create a sort of multi-billion dollar industry in the West, in the US, then we're missing out on something, and that's our potential, which we should be leveraging. Like Indian companies didn't have much to do with the proliferation of yoga in the West, and so it's our responsibility to at least take Ayurveda to the world. I think we're early days with Ayurveda. I think there's a long way to go with proliferation of Ayurveda globally, and I think we've sown the seeds, and obviously COVID has been um, sort of tough on many industries, but good for Ayurveda. So I think steps are being taken in the right direction from a government, from a company, from a consumer standpoint. But I think we need to all work together to take the science to the world, right? Like the same thing that happened with yoga needs to happen with Ayurveda as well.
Nice. And we actually had a question from one of our listeners who actually wanted to know, what are your honest opinions on Patanjali and their products?
Look, I haven't used many products to be honest, so I can't really talk about the product specifically. But I think as a business, it's doing quite well. But no, on the products, I don't have a view because I'm very biased. I only use Dr. Vaidya's products, so I think from that perspective, I don't have a view on the products, and so it's not fair to comment.
Right. And so, when you said you moved back after you were done with your time in the US at Brown University, if I remember correctly. So, did you feel perhaps that there was an opportunity to really bring Ayurveda into the 21st century? And if so, when you moved back, what were the steps that you think uh, that you could see that you needed to chart out for yourself to begin that process?
Yeah, so I think it wasn't a very theoretical process, to be honest. It was more of things falling into place. So I think I think when I moved back to India, I got a job in private equity. Right, I got a job in
Right.
finance. So I got a great exposure to um, sort of bunch of businesses in the consumer landscape, and I think that helped me sort of see a big change in the Indian consumer. Right, so we
Hmm.
grew up in an India where we were obsessed with imported products. I remember for my 11th birthday, I was gifted a Japanese electronic sharpener from a store that only sold imported products. Right,
Oh
and
wow.
that changed because I came back to an India which was sort of proud of our heritage, happy to consume quintessential Indian products. So I think that was a big change that I saw in my first role or my first job. The other thing was obviously proliferation of Ayurveda, as I said, Ministry of Ayush creation and consumer interest towards Ayurveda. I also got to work on the early days of e-commerce in India, like being part of a fund, and so got to see the proliferation of e-commerce. All of these things were sort of things that were brewing in my mind, and then my grandfather passed, right? And so we had this rich legacy, we had these conversations. I was cured of asthma, and I promised him I'd do something with the legacy at some point. So after he passed, I thought it's the right time to do this, and sort of went ahead and quit my job and said we're going to try something.
Sure. And so you worked in private equity, and then, of course, you became the CEO of Dr. Vaidya's after that. So when you took over, the company that has obviously this very long-standing legacy behind it, it has this very powerful brand name to it and gravity to it. What were the feelings in your head when you sort of took on that position, especially as someone who was, compared to the average CEO, was you started at a relatively young age?
Yeah, I was 24 and a half when I started. I think the other thing that's important is that Dr. Vedya's was not a business, it was a family legacy, right? Grandfather ran a clinic, and so people believe this is a family business. It was not a family business, it was just a Ayurvedic clinic with sort of products and some legacy. And so we had to start the brand from scratch. Right? So even the name Dr. Vedya's, I just named it after my grandfather, but creating the logo, packaging products, all of that was new. And so I think it took a lot of work. It's not easy to start a business when you're young in India because you're not taken seriously. But I think you just got to get through those times and sort of focus on what you're trying to build. I think from that perspective, we had a uh, sort of interesting vision, which we were early in the game. We realized with offline we were sort of very unsuccessful very early, and so pivoted to online only, which is the best thing that could happen to us, to be honest, early on
Hmm.
in our journey. And we started building online, and my wife joined the business. I convinced her to join, and she joined the business, and we started building. And look, from 2017, from doing one order every 3 days on our website, educating consumers, launching innovative products, learning how to build an online business, we grew from sort of one order every 3 days to 5,000 orders a day on our website in November 2020, which is I think a reasonable size for any single branded e-commerce website. So we did 1.5 million plus orders just on our website.
Right.
Um,
Wow.
1,500 pin codes in India, which is a pretty big deal and a pretty large number. Yeah, so it was an amazing journey, and I think it started with sort of something small, but I think the real exciting part was that I was able to take forward my grandfather's legacy and take forward his formulations and build a reasonable brand out of it.
Awesome. And I'm sure your grandfather will be very proud to see what you've accomplished with the company. So now I've talked about, your college years. We talked about Ayurveda rather extensively. So now obviously you've gone from that to starting a podcast, direct to a billion consumers. And I guess the first thing that I wanted to ask you is, as someone who's has this very deep rooted connection to Ayurvedic medicine, what made you start a podcast about business, about DTC companies? What was the motivation there?
Yeah, look, I think I was part of the ecosystem, right, of building a digital consumer brand. And I think the wave had started, right? Uh, so I think once the wave of digital consumer brands started, I felt it was still early on, but a lot of stories needed to be told, and a lot of people wanted to know more about D2C, and there was no resource in India. And as someone who struggles to read, I learn a lot from podcasts myself, and I'm a big listener of like Masters of Scale, Business Wars, etc. And so I always wanted to start my own podcast, and thought about it multiple times, and then the lockdown hit, and I had a little bit more time on my hands, and randomly reconnected with Keenan and told him I want to do this, and he was like, "Dude, we're doing this with Manic Pod, so let's kick it off." And learned a lot from him, um, and about what a podcast is, and really the idea behind the podcast was, hey, there are so many brands building sort of digitally in India and disrupting distribution across spaces, right? Apparel, personal care, health and wellness, beauty, mattresses,
Right.
all of these spaces, right? And there's one thing that unites all of these brands, which is using a digital distribution to reach consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's a fundamentally new age way that brands are being built today. There are so many people now that want to learn about this, right? I get so many messages when I'm late to upload an episode, or I haven't uploaded an episode with people sort of who want to know more, or want to learn more. So many early stage brands have also sort of been excited to listen to the podcast. Like Rahil, for example, is here. Rahil runs My Fitness Peanut Butter, and he reached out to me through my podcast, and eventually we got talking, and I've invested in his company right now. It's like the largest digital peanut butter brand in the country, and they're doing some amazing things. So I think the podcast also connects a lot of dots, right, and brings a lot of people together. And for our D2C or sort of direct to consumer ecosystem, I think it's super exciting, and yeah, I think with the podcast, a lot of exciting episodes coming up. I think we have 3, 4 more recordings lined up for the next few weeks, so will be fun.
Yeah, and we're working on episode 15 for you right now,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
And
And
so
14.
actually in our listener panel, they're all clamoring for Keenan to join us since you brought him up. And he also asked if he could join in for a question. So I'm going to just send him an invite so he can ask you a fan related question.
Sure.
So while we're waiting for him, let me just ask the
I'm here.
next question real quick, and then
Hi
we'll go to
guys.
Keenan. So, you know, obviously you've selected these guests, like the CEO of Epigamia, Slurp Farm, Vadan Tea, and all these, really cool companies. So how do you go about approaching these guests, and how do you convince them to come onto your show?
I think that's easier for me, right? Because I know most of these people and I'm from the ecosystem.
Right.
A lot of them listen to the podcast as well. So I think the idea for me is not really about difficult to convince these people, to find time from these people because they're super busy. But yeah, I think it's been a good journey, and I think we've got some amazing guests and we have some cool ones lined up. So excited for it.
Fantastic. So yeah, I'll step back and I'll let Keenan step in and ask his question.
Keenan is super excited to be here. Like
Yeah.
No,
going
I'm
crazy.
just reading the comments. Arjun, someone has called me cute. Vedant, by the way, your phone is echoing. Just lift it so it
Yeah,
doesn't
I've got
echo.
it. I've got it in my hands. Don't worry, man.
Okay. So Arjun, I came over here to add a little bit because I've known you for the longest, I guess,
Yeah.
since school. And shout out to Cathedral 2007 batch because that's what got this conversation started. That's what got this podcast started. I just mentioned that we started Manic Pod and you hit me up and then we started a conversation. So cheers to conversations as well now on Instagram Live. So Arjun, I have a question for you. Um,
Shoot, man.
Entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a it's a very interesting challenge that a lot of people might not be ready to take forward. Is this something you always thought you'd begin with when you were back in school with us, or is it something that developed over time?
Yeah, look, I think I didn't really think about this stuff when I was in school. I wasn't one of those to say it's my dream to start a company. I think at that time my dream was to play some sport for India. I couldn't do any of that. But look, I think it didn't. It was never my dream to start a company or sell a company or all of those things, right? It just, as I said to Vedant as well, it just things fell into place, and this meant something to me, and so it wasn't just about wanting to be an entrepreneur. It was about doing something that I genuinely believed in, and as long as you do that, whether it's working in a startup, building a startup, or even what you do as your day job, right? As long as you believe in it and you enjoy it, you'll do a good job. So no, I didn't say that growing up I want to be Steve Jobs and so part of my blood. No, and
Yeah,
actually,
that breaks.
when I was in private equity, I thought that I would never do it. And I was really happy with my stable job, but it just ended up happening, and like most things, it just happens, and that's how it happened.
Yeah, I guess that breaks the normal stereotype where everyone is. I mean, a lot of people are like, I'll work in a company for a while and then I'll go on and do my own thing. A lot of people, often say that, but it's crazy the way things work and how things just get channeled into the way it is. So that's amazing. I think that was the only question I had. I wanted to just come and say hi, but you guys carry on and have a good time.
All right, Keenan. Thanks for joining in. So I'm just gonna remove Keenan Blake Thomas. Okay. So, we talked about how you have all these guests and how fortunate you are to bring them onto your show. And these are guys who have obviously have, their own unique experiences and their own unique challenges for the companies that they have set up. And I was just curious to know, through your experience of actually sitting down with them and properly interviewing them about their stories, is there any one lesson from any one of your guests that you feel you've applied to your own journey since talking to them?
Yeah, look, I think in each of them, they're all friends, right? But you never end up going deep into their journey like you do through the podcast. So part of the
Right.
reason I do the podcast is to learn myself, right? And I learned a lot of things about these companies as well as these people through the
Mm-hmm.
podcast. Every time I release a podcast, I put an episode, I put a post on LinkedIn talking about what I learned or what my key learnings were. I think we've had some amazing learnings, right? Like, for example, we had Deepak from DSG on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he talked about the 10 new themes emerging in consumer brands in India or in Asia that he's looking at to invest in, right? And I learned a
Right.
lot from that. Similarly, we had Chaitanya from Wakefit, and he talked about how every big decision at their company is taken by talking to 50 customers for him, for his co-founder, and for his team. So they talk to 150 customers before they make any decision, right? And so I think these are sort of in each episode you find those nuggets of gold that you can apply whether you're a startup founder or building a startup or working in a startup or want to work in a startup or want to start something up. I think so for me, other than just sort of disseminating content, I think it's been a journey of learning from my perspective as well.
Awesome. And, through your journey of learning, we've been learning so much as well. And, it was it was rather serendipitous because when your first episode came out with, I believe it was Rohan Mirchandani
Yeah,
from Epigamia, at the time when we were working on that episode, actually, I just happened to catch the TED talk from the founder of Chorbani yogurt in the
yeah,
U.S. And he
yeah.
was telling his story about how when he took over one of the plants, it was in complete and utter disrepair, and how he took it and by just talking with the people who already were working there, who were terrified that they were going to lose their job, the plant was going to shut down, and then they just very honestly worked together and created something that is now grown up to be something very special. Listening to Rohan talk in that episode as well, it was very interesting to see some of the parallels that happened between those two stories. So it's always a fascinating experience listening to your podcasts. And that actually made me want to know, is there a guest that, is something of a dream guest for you? Someone that in the future you would absolutely love to have on your show?
Uh, it's a good question actually. So there is a guy called Darshan Patel who runs Vinny Cosmetics and who built Paras before. So
Mhm.
he pretty much built and sold two really really large consumer brand entities. And yeah, I think he's aspiration. If I can get him on the podcast, that'll be great. Rahil says it's him, and he has to come on the podcast, but he's agreed already. So we'll have Rahil on the podcast as well soon.
Nice, nice. I like how he's just like it's you. It, so we're looking forward to that as well from with Rahil as well. So your podcast in terms of structure, right, is just it's you sitting with a guest and you guys have that conversation, and obviously it is the easiest kind of setup to have during the pandemic, of course. But in the future, do you see yourself maybe adapting the format to include more of a, I guess, for argument's sake, something like a roundtable discussion where you bring multiple guests in and you guys talk about,
Yeah, actually,
businesses and
Rohan
DTCs.
wanted to do that. Rohan wanted to do that, and we talked about it a few months ago. I think it'll be better done in person, or you'll
Right.
have talking over each other. But yeah, it would be super cool.
Yeah, no, and honestly, it would be absolutely interesting to see how those guests just interact with each other as well. Because, like you said, they're all friends of yours. They're from the same social circle. So seeing them, in a more formal setting, really trying to, uh, you know, get nuggets from each other's brains, that would be a really interesting thing for us to listen to as well. So. That is something that, of course, you've discussed and hopefully does come to fruition in the future. I'm sure we'd all love to see that. And I guess I just want to finish off this interview by asking you one final question, which is short term, what is in store for you, the podcast, and whatever it is you're doing right now?
Sorry, can you repeat?
What is in store for you short term? Like, what are you planning in terms of your own life, the podcast? What can we look forward to in
Yeah,
store for you?
you'll see it next week. I have a new big thing coming up. So yeah, you'll see it next week. But I'll give you a hint. It's in the venture investing space. So getting back to sort of investing, but this time giving back to the D2C ecosystem. Yeah. So very exciting. And yeah, I think since we sold Dr. Vaidya has done a bunch of angel investments, of which MyFitness is one of them. And about 17 investments now. Mentor advice on D2C brands. Teaching a course on D2C with my wife, which is fun. But a new big thing, and you hear about next week.
Fantastic. And so with that, Arjun, I just wanted to say thank you so much for agreeing to do this with us. It was an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And don't worry, we'll be getting episode 14, 15, and all the future episodes out the door as quickly as we can.
Awesome.
So thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you in the future, man.
Thanks, Vedant. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. So that was our interview with Arjun Vaidya. Thank you so much for joining in. This is Vedant Naik from Manic Pod, signing off.